This is the audiobook version of a Christmas special. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the story.
Chapter 4. Kevin. I began to move away from the doors when Connor grabbed my arm with a tight grasp. I looked down at his hand, then back up at his face with a raised brow. "There's something you should know before we go looking for this thing," Connor muttered. I could instantly tell whatever it was, I wasn't going to like it. "What didn't you tell me?" "These bullets will only kill the Shtriga if we catch her in the midst of feeding," Connor explained with a sigh. "The Shtriga can't kill Mariana by feeding upon her. It may weaken her, but Mariana will be fine. If you want to get out of here, it's our only option." I didn't like the idea of putting Mariana's life at risk, but I knew he was right. Fine. Where do we start? A loud bang echoed throughout the store. Connor and I looked at one another as we nodded in unison. We ran forward, but a familiar feeling came over me as I stopped short. Connor slowed down beside me with confusion. "What's wrong?" Connor questioned. I met his confused gaze. "I think she knows we're coming." I turned around, and when I turned back, I was surrounded by flowers. Connor nowhere in sight. I walked forward to hear a crunch beneath my shoe, lifting up my foot to find broken ceramic pots. I rose up when I heard another loud bang, as if metal was being molded. I ran forward to find myself in another aisle with a bench shelf beside me. I kneeled down and knew they were close. They had to be. I stood with labored breathing, my strength weakening each time I moved. I slightly turned and ran straight into a bouncy castle, the inflatable material hitting me right in the face. I rubbed my now sore nose when my ears perked up at the sound of muffled talking. I walked forward when I felt a hand grab my arm and pull me backward behind a shelf. The hand rose to my mouth as Connor warned me to be careful. "They're in the aisle beside us," Connor whispered. He removed his hand so I could respond. "Why did she teleport us around just to have us wind up beside her?" "Because she wants us to watch. Come on." Connor led the way as we leaned up against the end of the shelf. He peeked around the corner as he motioned for me to do the same. I snuck a look to find the Shtriga on top of Mariana. Mariana was struggling against her, looking paler than she usually did. I took my gun out and was prepared to shoot. I wanted to make my move, but Connor shook his head as he placed his hand on my chest. "Don't. You have to wait until she feeds or it'll all be for nothing," Connor warned. I reluctantly lowered my gun. Connor and I switched positions so I could peer over the edge of the shelf. I only caught part of Mariana's words.
Kevin will stop at nothing to find me, and when he does, he'll die.
She sounded so confident and trusting in me. I knew we wanted to protect one another as we were partners and friends, but that was the first time I heard her say something like that. I smiled to myself before refocusing on the task at hand. The Shtriga laughed.
"Well, I guess I better have another taste before he does."
Her hand wrapped around Mariana's chin, opening her mouth. I saw the confident front Mariana was putting on, the fear behind her eyes. I've seen her angry, happy, sad, and sarcastic. I don't think I'd ever seen her truly afraid. A white mist began to billow from Mariana's lips into the Shtriga's own mouth. Mariana's body bent upward into the shape of a bridge, pain smothering her features. Her eyes met mine as that fear turned into hope. The simple act made me lose any sort of self-control. My protective instinct kicked in, and I knew I couldn't sit back any longer. I had to take action now. Connor sensed what I was about to do as he frantically shook his head. I knew I should calculate my shot and steady my aim, but watching Mariana writhe in pain affected me more profusely than I ever imagined. I stepped out of our hiding spot and took my shot. The bullet lodged into the Shtriga's shoulder, missing her heart by a good few inches. As the bullet collided with her skin, she screeched at a deafening pitch. Connor and I grabbed at our ears, and the Shtriga got up from Mariana and spun around to face me. She reached up to her shoulder and pulled the bullet from her torn flesh, flinging it down to the floor. The bullet clattered against the tile with a ding. Agatha's head tilted to the side with a vicious glare.
"You must be Kevin."
"The one and only," I spat, pointing my gun at her again. "Now I suggest you step away from my friend, or I'll make you sorry."
"You can't kill me that way."
"It may not kill you, but it'll sting," I muttered, shooting another bullet into her stomach. Agatha looked down at the wound as black blood flowed down her shirt. She looked from it and back to me with fury. She growled beneath her breath with intensity. Her eyes met mine.
"My turn."
Agatha lunged toward me with all her speed. Connor, with quick thinking, pushed me out of the way as the Shtriga tackled him. I spun around as he started fighting her off. "Go get your friend!" Connor yelled, kicking the Shtriga into the next aisle. I wanted to help Connor, but I saw Mariana lying on the floor and changed my mind. I ran to Mariana's side, helping her to sit up against the shelf. She laid her head near the cans of soup, smiling up at me.
"I knew you'd come for me,"
she whispered. I will always comfort you, I said, grasping her hand in mine. Are you okay?
I'm weak, but I'll live. I'm a badass vampire. No soul-sucking witch could take me down.
You are quite badass. I'd agree. We smiled at one another for a short moment before Mariana's smile suddenly faded. She pulled herself into a more comfortable position. Mariana coughed, a low, rattling type of cough. If she were human, I'd think she was dying.
Kevin, I want you to know that
Mariana began, muttering a bit.
I don't get close to people. Not anymore, at least. But when I was separated from you, I felt bad.
Bad? I questioned.
I missed you.
She admitted as her emerald eyes met mine with honesty.
I know we've only known each other for a few months, but I genuinely missed you. You're the first human in a very long time that I've actually felt close to. I just wanted to tell you before I chickened out, because I am awful at sharing how I feel.
That you are, I agree. She smiled slightly with an apology on her lips.
I'm sorry your plans got ruined because of me.
This is not your fault. If anything, it's my fault. I was the one who chose this dumb store. You should be blaming me, I retorted.
Well, then I blame you. What happened to all your great detective skills, Mr. P.I.?
Mariana sarcastically joked with a wide smile. Christmas clouds my judgment, Mrs. Vampire Lady, I joked in return. We both laughed aloud as movement caught our attention. Connor was thrown into one of the shelves, picked up by his shirt, and thrown down the aisle. He slid down the tiles on his back, his head landing right beside Mariana's foot. He looked out of breath and sweaty. We better come up with a plan. She's kicking my ass, Connor gasped. Agatha appeared at the end of the aisle. Having Connor's gun in her hand, she looked directly at us as she crushed the gun into a tiny ball of metal, the gun hitting the floor with a clatter. Mariana tried to stand, but her wobbly legs caused her to fall back down, while Connor was trying to regain the strength to lift his head. I knew, in this moment, I was the only one strong enough to defeat the Shtriga, but I honestly had no idea how I was going to do that. I rose to my feet and separated from the group. Mariana watched my movement with concern, but I silently reassured her everything was going to be fine as I turned my attention to Agatha. Hey, ugly! I yelled, her gaze meeting mine. Come and get it! Agatha screeched as she ran at me. I slid into the next aisle, running as fast as I could. She appeared before me, using her palm to knock me on my ass. I got to my feet and pointed my gun at her. Yet when I pointed the gun in her direction, she was already gone. I heard her laugh ringing around me like a shadowed beast. I spun around trying to spot her, but each time I did, she would vanish before I could even pull the trigger. At last, she stopped just long enough for me to get a bullet in her leg. She appeared before me, knocking my gun from my hand and pinning me up against the shelf. Her hands wrapped around my throat, her nails digging into my flesh.
You're one idiotic human.
I was going to say confident, I retorted, her hands squeezing my throat just a little bit tighter.
You're just as annoying as Mariana is.
We're two peas in a pod, I gasped with a smile.
Well, let's see if you taste as good as she did then.
Agatha leaned in close as she forced my mouth to open. My hand shot upward to grasp hers, her mouth lighting up like a Christmas tree. I felt a tugging within my chest, a similar white mist escaping my lips as it had from Mariana's. I now understood why she was in pain, because it was excruciating. I felt my legs weakening beneath Agatha's grasp as my heartbeat quickened. It was almost as if she was pulling the blood from my heart and breath from my lungs, the light from my soul. I lost all feeling in my fingertips, my eyes beginning to close. Suddenly, a loud bang filled the air. Agatha fell backward onto the floor as I collapsed, coughing to regain my breath. I turned to find Agatha. Dead. I looked from her to where the shot had come from to find Mariana standing in the middle of the aisle, the gun still smoking in her hand. She threw the gun to the ground as she limped over to my side. Mariana offered her hand to me as she pulled me onto my feet.
Are you okay?
Mariana's gaze lingered as my hand rose to my neck, bringing it back into my line of sight to find blood on my fingertips. Agatha must have cut me when she had me pinned against the shelf. I re-met Mariana's gaze as she swallowed the spit in her throat. I could see it in her eyes, and when she realized this, she looked away. I took my shirt and wiped my neck clean. We were both heavily weak, but I had more strength than she did. I offered to help her, but she didn't want to get too close in case something happened. I agreed as we slowly walked away from Agatha together. I noticed Mariana's shuffling feet, but did not intervene. We re-entered the aisle where we left Connor to find him beginning to stand. Is she dead? Connor asked, holding his arm close to his body, most likely fractured. I quickly nodded as Connor exhaled in relief. He led the way toward the front of the store. The second we stepped outside, the lights within the building went dark. Whether that was a coincidence or due to Agatha's death, I could not be certain. Connor walked with us to the car as I unlocked the door and helped Mariana inside, closing the door behind her. Once she was comfortable, I turned to Connor. Where are you going to now? I'm thinking of taking a vacation or a much-needed nap. What about you two? Connor sighed, holding his hand against his bruised ribs. Just back to work as usual, I said, offering my hand to him. It was nice to meet you, Connor. He shook my hand in return. Nice to meet you too, Kevin. Let's hope we never meet in this kind of circumstance again. Connor waved goodbye as I got in the car to find Mariana with a shocked expression. I turned toward her with confusion. What's up?
We were in there for 4 days.
Mariana exclaimed, pointing her screen back to me to reveal the date to be December 24th, Christmas Eve. It felt like mere hours, I muttered to myself. Mariana sighed.
Yeah, I guess she could do more than drain energy and teleport.
I guess so. I started up the car and drove towards town. The entire car ride was silent, and neither of us minded. I think after the 4 days we had, we deserved some peace and quiet. As I drove, I kept peeking over at Mariana to find her face grimaced in pain, her hands shaking profusely. Instead of driving back to my office, I took Mariana home. With a few odd looks in the elevator, we made it to her apartment door and I helped her onto the couch. Her body eased against the fabric, the pain lessening on her features. Mariana, what can I do to make this better? I pleaded, wanting her pain to cease. Her eyes met mine.
Go home. Once I rest for a little while, I'll get myself some blood from the fridge and I'll be as good as new. Why don't you head home and maybe we can meet up tomorrow once both of us are in better shape?
I'm not going to leave you like this. Let me get the blood for you. Please. She nodded slightly as I shot to my feet. I made my way into the kitchen, grabbing a blood bag from the door of the fridge. I cut the bag open with the scissors beside me and poured the red nectar into one of her favorite mugs. I popped it into the microwave to return some of its warmth and brought it to Mariana. She pulled herself into a sitting position as she took a long sip. Her eyes rolled into the back of her head as pleasure smothered her features. I still could not get used to the fact that Mariana drank blood and enjoyed it like wine. I would ask her about what it was like on another day, as my focus right now was her health. When she had downed the entire mug, she allowed me to help her to bed. I tucked her in and made sure that she was as comfortable as she could be. Good night, Mariana, I whispered with a smile.
Good night, Kevin.
Mariana snuggled up against her pillow as I let myself out of her bedroom. I was tired and weak, ready to collapse and take a long winter's nap. But I had a mission. There were only a few hours left until Christmas Day, and I wasn't going to waste time.
After Kevin left, I fell asleep almost instantly. I slept for only a few hours when I was awoken by a jingling coming from my living room. I thought an intruder may have broken in, so I prepared for a fight. I tiptoed into the living room, a knife in hand as I still wasn't at full strength to fight anyone off. Yet, when I saw what had become of my apartment, I dropped the knife with a smile. The entire place was decorated in string lights of every color. A tree stood tall in the corner, covered in lights, garland, and beautiful ornaments. A wreath on my door and my fireplace going strong. It was a Christmas wonderland with Kevin standing in the middle, a Santa hat haphazardly placed upon his head. What's all this? I asked with awe.
Well, I still wanted to give you a proper Christmas. I went out to a store that was still open and picked all this up. I even got you a little something special,
Kevin said, offering a small wrap box to me. I took the box from him with guilt on my face. I didn't have time to get you anything.
That's okay. You'll just have to make it up to me next Christmas. Now open it.
I looked down at the red and green box. I could see Kevin's sprawled out handwriting on the tag with a smiley face next to my name. I undid the beautiful golden bow and removed the top of the box. Inside was a snow globe of a small forest. I removed it from the box to get a closer look to find a small clearing and 2 little people laying in the snow. I shook the globe as sparkly flakes fell down among the trees.
I know you like the snow, so I made sure you never have to stop enjoying its beauty.
I looked down at it as tears came to my eyes. Thank you. I set the snow globe on the coffee table and hugged him tightly. Kevin wrapped his arms around me and made me feel safe. I knew he was only human, but I didn't care, because this meant more to me than he could ever imagine. When we finally separated, Kevin pulled another Santa hat from the couch and placed it upon my head. I pulled it over my ears with a genuine smile.
There's something else I'd like to do to celebrate,
Kevin said as he dug around in his pocket and pulled out a small plant.
You can't say no to mistletoe.
He lifted above our heads as I laughed. This was so cheesy, and I loved every second of it. Before he could say anything else, I leaned forward and gave him a kiss. His eyes went wide with shock, but soon turned into joy. I pulled back just as the grandfather clock rang throughout the apartment. I looked up at Kevin with a smile. "Merry Christmas, Kevin." Kevin looked out at me with the same type of smile.
Merry Christmas, Mariana.